what up? We're your hosts, Michael and John here, and welcome back to another banger of an episode on our podcast, Flies and Lies, where we unpack the truths and myths about human behavior in today's episode of How Do We Compare? William Golding's Lord of the Flies versus the Real World. And now, over to my friend John for our first talking point. Thank you, John. Now, we'll start off with an oldie but a goodie. What would happen if civilization collapsed? How would it impact the people? Well, I don't know, but we're about to find out. Let's get into it. If we take a look back in time to around 800, 1000 AD, we'll be able to see how the Maya civilization collapsed. Now, taking a look here at livescience.com, we see an article by Owen Jarris. This article is labeled, Why Did the Maya Civilization Collapse? After a deep little search, we can see that it wasn't necessarily the society that collapsed, but their political system that collapsed. This is very similar to Golding's novel The Lord of the Flies because we can see that their political system collapsed since Jack lost the election against Ralph. He's been going against the rules, and when people don't follow the rules, society is a total mess. We also see that in the book when the conch breaks and Piggy dies. This totally turns the tide in favor of Jack, as there's no longer society and they can do whatever they want, which is what they want. Now, going back to the Mayans, however, this is why some people would go as far as to say this civilization can't really be called a collapsed civilization. Later in the same article, we see how there are still millions of Mayans living today, even though the Mayan civilization collapsed over 1,000 years ago. Alrighty, now let's send it over to Michael.
Thank you, John. After looking at what happens to people when civilization falls, let's now take a look at what happens when people get affected by mob mentality and how it, alongside fear, can create a situation of violence. One of the most fairly recent events that show us violence in a mob is the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. When 5 people were killed during a violent and heavily armed mob attack. According to the American Oversight, they planned for weeks to overthrow the election in favor of Donald Trump. Isn't this the same concept we see in Lord of the Flies, when Jack has his rise to power and how he eventually is able to overthrow Ralph and create his own tribe of savages, which is eventually the cause for Piggy and Simon's death? Both groups, when are in a mob, are able to put past their identities and hurt people without the fear of getting in trouble. Now, let's take a moment and play an ad from our sponsor.
Your shot's not the problem. It's those. Want to shoot threes like Shaquille O'Neal?
Of course I do, but I can't shoot the ball.
Try these.
Oh, these feel great.
Talking mushrooms out of here.
It's time to take control. Transform your game just like me. If you have big dreams of making it to the WNBA, you need Swiss cheese.
They're comfortable, reliable, and money back guarantee within the first 3 hours of purchase under $11.53.
It's time to take control of your game.
Alrighty, now that that's over with, hopefully you bought some shoes. We'll now take a look at how people through time have always tried to gain power over other people, and how this power dictates what they do. Looking here at this article at how did Adolf Hitler happen, we can quickly dive into a prime example of someone trying to gain power over others. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933. He was an absolute ruler just like many others of his time. He looked up and admired Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. At this time, Adolf Hitler was elected, the world was going through a crisis. Everyone was suffering from the stock market crash. Hitler used this to his advantage as he could show that capitalism wasn't working, and he, just like other people of Germany, were suffering. This made people like him because they could relate to him. Once he had power though, he didn't let go of it until a suicidal death in April of 1945. This power led him to do whatever he wanted, such as death camps, to kill millions of Jews, Slavs, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Bear with me now, the script. Alrighty. He did this because no one but himself could stop him. Ironically, he stopped himself because he killed himself. This is very similar to the novel The Lord of the Flies, as we can see how Jack really wants to rule over the other boys on this island. However, Jack wasn't elected to be chief, but once civilization was at its low point, he struck, just like Adolf Hitler. He created his own tribe and convinced others to join him, just like Hitler did. Once almost everyone was on Jack's side, he was able to do whatever he wanted, including killing Piggy and attempting to kill Ralph. Now, that's very similar to what Hitler did. Now, that's enough of me talking, however. Now let's throw the mic over to Michael and see what he has to say.
Now, finally, after talking about the novel and how we can see similarities in real life, let's now talk about actual moments where groups of young people have crashed in deserted places and had to fend for themselves. While searching around, I found two separate incidences of this happening. One with the Uruguayan rugby team crashing the Andes in 1972, and another, a group of schoolboy kids in 1965 after stealing a whaling boat out of boredom. We can compare these events to Golding's beliefs that without constraints of civilization, the young people will tend to almost revert to a savage-like version of themselves. In the Andes situation, we see that the harsh climate of the mountains and the initial impact of the crash was the hardest part. Barely surviving, the 16 survivors had to resort to cannibalism, eating the bodies of the dead in order to survive. While in a more positive light, we see the boarding school boys and how they survived their spontaneous adventure. After being adrift for more than 8 days, they made it to the island of Ada. They were quickly able to work together and survive for 15 months, establishing a garden system, permanent fire, shelters, gym, and even a badminton court, as well as a strict roster of duties. Isn't that impressive? We see both stories contradict Golding. Although the rugby team did have to resort to cannibalism, they only ate those who were already dead and stayed in a small, tight group in order to survive. And the boarding school boys did not only survive, but thrived in the situation they were placed in, showing that in cases of being stranded happen, it's up to the people what they make of it, and all of them aren't destined for chaos and savagery. So finally, how do we actually compare? Are we just like how Golding states, beast-like creatures when civilization falls? Well, I think the situation is different for everyone. I think Golding's perception on things is just a little bit wrong. As we see from multiple real-life examples, including actual moments where group have been stuck for months on end on an island, none of them have acted like the boys in the novel. Yes, there was acts of cannibalism. They did eat the dead bodies. And yes, violence happened. But we are all motivated more on the idea of survival and still maintain ethical and moral reason. We have not seen an event where we have resorted to a primal version unhuman-like. Now, to wrap it up, we'd like to thank our sponsor for sponsoring this video. We hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you on another episode of Flies and Lies.